What's going on, guys? My name is Arrow, and in today's video, we're going to do two things. Number one, we're going to talk about my brand new Perforate build, which blasted the endgame, destroyed maps, we had a ton of fun. And two, we're going to be talking about a new melee archetype that I have discovered, rage stacking. Stay tuned. So this Perforate build was so much fun to play, but before we get into any of that, I want to talk about the archetype that I accidentally created in the process. Rage stacking is something that I've never seen done before to this level. It started by me trying to make a chain hook build, because chain hook has a really interesting interaction with rage, where one, it generates it just by using the skill, And 2, there is a helm enchant that gives you base radius per rage. So I thought, okay, let's see how much rage I can get, and that'll give me insane radius. And it did. I had more than full screen AoE with Chainhook, and I played it for a couple days, but the problem was it was just so clunky that I couldn't stand to play it any longer, even though it worked. However, we decided, let's look into what other skills might work with this. You know, we're going to lose a bunch of the AoE from the helm enchant, but there are other really good melee skills that might feel good with this sort of archetype that we put together. So let's talk about rage stacking and what you need to get started and how it works. So there's a few items that you need to get: a Rigwald Savagery, which is an axe that gives you base rage. You're going to have to offhand a sword as a requirement of the Rigwald Savagery. You need the Replica Conqueror's Efficiency Jewel, which is a fairly cheap jewel, usually 30C by day 2. And Rigwald Savagery is about 2C maybe. Bear's Girdle, which is a couple seed belt, which gives you base rage and some other stats. You can get 15 more base rage from the tree, which are very easy to get. You're going to be taking the axe nodes anyway, and you're already in that area, so 15 on the tree. You get 10 more from the Berserker Ascendancy, as well as a bunch of other stats for rage, which are really, really strong. So when you combine all that together with your base of 50 rage, you have an easily achievable 125 rage. That's really strong. Now, each rage inherently gives 1% attack damage. Each 2 rage gives 1 attack speed. Each 5 rage gives 1 movement speed. Rite of Ruin from Berserker triples these effects, and Bear's Girdle gives us 6% increased physical damage per rage, 7 if you put some Fizz quality catalysts on it. So we've got a bunch of sources of rage as well. So getting to max rage is very, very quick. It takes a few seconds of attacking. So we spend 99% of our time in maps at max rage. You never really need to use Berserk. I usually will save it for a boss. But anyway, at the end of the day, we have 125 rage. We have all these stats. So let's talk about what rage gives us just from these few items, the Ascendancy, and a few points on the tree. So with all of these things combined, rage gives us 375% attack damage, 186 attack speed, 75% movement speed, 84% increased physical damage, stun immunity, and all enemies are crushed, which means we ignore physical resistance. This is a fantastic foundation for a number of builds. Pretty much any melee build that wants attack speed can take advantage of this archetype. So I know one of the things that a lot of people are going to ask about are the Kaum Spirit gloves. And these gloves are very cool. They provide rage generation instead of life regeneration, which is really nice. You can get some life regen, and then it just passively gives you rage. The problem is, for this build, Berserker specifically, the part that triples our rage effect, makes us take damage per second. We essentially degen life while we are raging. So if you use these gloves, it creates this clunky scenario where whenever you're not berserking, which is going to be a decent amount of the time, you are taking a huge degen and you have no life regen to counteract it. I tested it. It was strong, but it was clunky, and I just didn't want to advertise a build that uses these gloves that, one, are not super cheap at the beginning of a league, but also it's just not a fun play style for me. One of the solutions could be that you use Warlord's Mark and Mark on hit. So when you're stunning enemies, you regen rage. If you are playing a skill that reliably stuns, you can use these gloves as a way to constantly be regenning rage and have really, really high uptime on your Berserk. But still, the problem lies in that when you are not berserking, if you stand still and you're not berserking, you're talking to June for your betrayal mechanic, you might just, degen yourself to death. So I prefer not to play with them. I just think this is a really fun archetype that is cheap to put together because these items are very easy to acquire, and it's fun and reliable. So if you want to play around with the Kaum Spirit gloves, you absolutely can. There are some ways to do that, but we're not going to do that here in today's build. So with all that said, let's get into part 2 of the video where I showcase the Perforate build that was eventually the end game of the Chainhook Rage Stacker that I started a while back. So Perforate, really fun skill. It has 2 modes. When you are in Sand Stance, you do way more AoE, and you have these spikes effectively go out from you in a circle pattern. It feels a lot like ethereal knives with AoE. It's very similar distance. When you get explode, it effectively just feels like you're playing ethereal knives, except you don't have to scale ethereal knives, which doesn't do any damage. So when you're in blood stance, what it does is it takes all those spikes and puts them into a really close AoE, and they all come out of the ground and can all hit the same target. So it gives you a one button, effectively weapon swap sort of situation where you go into blood stance and your damage, I believe, somewhere like triples to quadruples. I think my build was doing about 8 to 9 million damage in sand stance and about 30 million-ish in blood stance. So incredibly strong. It means that as soon as you've built up your rage, you can swap stances, and you actually get bonus damage if you swap every 4 seconds. Now, you don't need to do that throughout the map, but if you run into an extremely tanky essence monster or an arch nemesis rare, you switch to blood stance and you delete that boss. It's really, really nice for mapping. It's really strong for killing guardians and things because you generate rage during the map, and when you get to the boss, you can kind of press all your buttons and just delete the boss. You turn on Berserk, you turn on Blood Stance, and that's it. You delete them. So let's dive into this version of the rage stacking archetype, and I will show you how I have made that base into a really fun, really strong, really tanky build. Let's dive in. Also, just as a quick aside, we did it, boys. Cobra Lash MTX is in the game. If you want to support GGG, go buy it. If you want to support me for doing all that hard work and finally getting us a Cobra Lash MTX, you can subscribe here or come to my Twitch and check me out there. Follow and subscribe. I appreciate it. All right, so the character named Marauder, M. Aroder, a little play on words for you. This character is the final iteration of the chain hook rage stacking berserker. We started with chain hook because of this helmet right here. Chain hook has +1 radius per 12 rage. Because we have 125 rage when we're using the Bear's Girdle belt, that was giving us 10 additional base radius. Base radius is then scaled by your area of effect, and we ended up getting our chain hook area to, I think, 105, which is actually bigger than Legion League Cyclone builds. It was more than the full screen by a decent amount. So let's dive into the gear real quick, and we'll talk about some of the interactions. So Rigwald Savagery, because this item's so cheap, you can get really good corruptions on it for not that much. I think I paid 30C for this weapon that has Fortify and Onslaught on Kill on it. The helmet, very important to get the Perforate enchant with +2 spikes, because not only does that give you better clear, but when you go into blood stance, it means more spikes per second and per attack effectively, which means just more, it's a more damage multiplier. The Abyss is obviously fantastic for us to give us some fizz damage, which we need because our main weapons do not do a ton of base physical damage. So flat fizz is really strong, and then obviously over 100 melee crit multi is very, very nice. The other weapon is Paradoxica. This is the best offhand sword that you can use in this build. There's a few variations that are strong. The one I have has Blood Rage on Kill, attack speed, and double damage. Very, very strong. If you're not able to afford a Paradoxica, you can use a Savior. A pretty well-rolled Savior is still fairly cheap. It's got a much lower dex requirement than this, so when I put on the Bear's Girdle and drop the Headhunter, I actually have to swap to the Savior. But it is nice for clear. It gives you more illusions of yourself, which go around and hit stuff. So it's actually pretty nice for clear, and you'll see that a bit in the footage at the beginning. So this is a decent second item. We can talk about the belt now. So Bear's Girdle, if you are playing the cheap version of this and you don't have a Headhunter yet, Bear's Girdle gives you extra rage, gives you damage per rage, gives you crush. It's just super, super strong. So, and this is a 2C item. For our jewelry, let's talk about the amulet first. This is just kind of just a bunch of random stuff. I needed dexterity. I needed a bunch of dex. So I grabbed something that had a ton because the Paradoxica requires 212 dexterity. And at the time I wasn't wearing a headhunter, so I didn't get this 63 dex. You don't need this much dex normally. So aside from that, it's got multi on it and area of effect, area damage, and some minus cost. Our Perforate actually costs us 0 mana, which is super nice because when our attack speed gets really, really high, even if it was 1, 2, 3, if you're attacking 20 times per second with a headhunter on, you are not going to be able to sustain 3 or 4 mana cost. So it's really nice to get your mana cost super low. So we have mana cost on 2 of our items here. I think if we take this, nope, can't do that. If we take this off, our mana cost goes to 4, which probably would be doable. I had an open prefix, so I figured let's just do it. So then let's talk about the rings. This ring, I just needed a ton of resistances. I don't need this much anymore. When I first made the build, I had some res problems from other gear slots. But yeah, you basically just want to get life and res on a ring here. If you're going to use this ring, which is huge damage. 72% of Fizz is extra chaos because we have no other conversion in our build. We just scale Fizz damage. This just ends up being a huge more multiplier for us. I think it was like 35% more damage for the build. So you lose life, which is not great. 25% reduced max life is a problem. It's not ideal, but this build gets pretty tanky and we'll talk about how. And then also the chaos res is really, really strong. For the boots, these are not mandatory. I wanted elusive and tailwind so I could just go faster. The tailwind scales our movement speed, so we have a ton, and then tailwind takes your movement speed and gives it a more multiplier. Headhunter, best in slot, not even close, because we are pure Fizz, which means we can convert Fizz to, unless you're using brutality, which we are not, you can convert Fizz as extra and just get tons more damage from Headhunter buffs. So very, very strong. If you don't use this and you're going to use Bear's Girdle, highly recommend Inspired Learning. The gloves, we tried a few things here. First, we started with Ascendancy's Gentle Touch. These give you better clear. Not necessary, but they were super cheap and you can get really nice implicits on them because there's a div card for that, but not mandatory. So we tried Null and Void, which gives you some physical damage immunity when you rampage. It gives you rampage, which is more attack speed, more movement speed, some life, and then you can get good implicits on this as well. And then Calm Spirit, we talked about, not an ideal item for this build as is. You'd have to make some changes to really fit it in. Okay, so let's talk about the Ascendancy next. So Flawless Savagery, Flat Fizz, again, really, really strong for us. Multi and crit chance, obviously good. Aspect of Carnage, this makes you take increased damage, but gives you 40% more damage. Now this build is so tanky that this is really not a problem for us to take increased damage. But if you are playing a version that isn't quite as tanky, you might not want to use this. You might want to go for maybe Warbringer. Blitz could give you more attack speed. You'll have to decide on how your build feels. And then the important stuff for the rage stacking. We have Crave the Slaughter, which gives us rage on hit, one of our many sources of rage generation, and then 10 max rage. Rite of Ruin is the core of this build, triple the effect of rage, which we talked about all those stats that you get from having rage. So strong. And then of course the problem is lose 0.1% of life per second per rage while you are not losing rage. So if you are berserking, you are losing rage, which means you're not losing life. I guess if you've stopped gaining rage and now your rage is deteriorating, you're not losing life. However, while you are just mapping, you're going to be feeling these effects. So you got to have life regen to counter it, and you have to have sources of leech, life gain on hit. Which brings me to our jewels. So let's talk about our Watcher's Eye. We have gain 29 life per enemy hit while affected by vitality. This is just an unbelievably strong counter to that. So much life per second, especially while mapping. If you're hitting lots of enemies, 29 life per enemy hit is just absurd. It's going to keep you capped off at full life at all times. And then Determination, we have some extra armor. You can do some other things here. Watcher's Eyes are always going to be whatever you can afford, plus whatever is mandatory for this build. I'd say that 29 per life enemy hit's not mandatory, but it is very, very strong. We also have Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame Jewels from Juggernaut. Unbreakable. This is so strong. This is one of the strongest things I think that have been added to the game in quite a while. If you get a good chunk of armor, not only is that protecting you from Fizz, and you just get capped on res, it is now protecting you from elemental damage as well, and it makes you pretty much unkillable, it feels like. while you're not doing like uber boss content. So we get to about 105,000 armor, which just makes us feel so tanky. We never die while mapping, especially if we have rage up. You slam that berserk button, you take less damage, you just delete whatever is on the screen. So unbreakable, these are not cheap, but if you can afford these and you're doing a build like this, highly, highly recommend them. We have a lethal pride over here, which is, you can use the tool in PoB to find a good one. Things that we're looking for, life, endurance charge on kill, melee crit multi, business extra fires, whatever. And then we have a couple of double damages over here, and then leech, which we don't need. But you can get a lot of really strong stuff starting with double damage. We talked about how we use Replica Conqueror's efficiency. We use Purposeful Harbinger because we needed the mana reservation efficiency, and Purposeful Harbinger is a nice extra aura effect for us, and we use a lot of auras in this build. For our large cluster, we have Battle Hardened here, which is armor and fizz damage, master the fundamentals, elemental resistances and fizz damage, and I think it's the same on the other, Battle Hardened and master the fundamentals. Yeah, same on the other one. So just two of those. They're not crazy amounts of damage, but they're nice, and they enable our medium clusters. So mediums, we have Overwhelming, Malice, and Pressure Points. Unholy Might for us is just a more multiplier for damage. You get Unholy Might on crit, which means you have it on bosses. Unholy Might is 30% of fizz as extra chaos. Huge damage. We're effectively doing 102% of fizz as extra chaos in this build. That's a lot. Pressure Points is more double damage. Warning Call, this is coming from a Exerted Attacks medium cluster. So Warning Call gives us armor per 5 power. This ends up being a huge amount of armor that we have up at all times because we have Enduring Cry on left click. Left click Enduring Cry means that we walk around and we just cast Enduring Cry. You see up here we have our endurance charges.
Don't do this yet.
And then as soon as it comes off cooldown, you cast again, which means we have 4 endurance charges at all times, and we have a small amount of uptime of the bonus effect, 5 endurance charges of the bonus effect of Enduring Cry, which is more resists and more reduction of fizz damage. So that's going to be up at all times. Really, really strong. This armor is going to be up at all times. And then we're taunting enemies with our War Cry, which gives us crit chance and crit multi. This jewel is just a whatever that I had. It's not even good because I don't have fire. This is not a fire skill. And that is it for the jewels. On the tree, we're going around and we're getting melee crit multi, life. We're taking a few War Cry wheels, and that's really about it. We take this for accuracy because we need some dex, we need some accuracy, and then we get some more rage generation from the Axe Master here, which is really, really strong. And that is pretty much it for the tree. Not too exciting. More rage over here as well, but nothing too crazy. Pretty straightforward. Okay, let's quickly go over the gems. So we have in our weapon, we have Assassin's Mark linked to mark on hit, so we don't have to manually cast it. We have Enduring Cry, which is on left click. Go down here to our aura setup. We have Determination, Herald of Ash, and Herald of Purity connected to an Enlighten 4. We have Vitality, Blood and Sand, and War Banner as well for our auras. And we also have Leap Slam, which is our main movement skill. Because we have so much attack speed, when our rage is up, we don't need to link it to faster attacks or anything like that. You're just flying around. It becomes actually a little bit uncontrollable if you get too many Headhunter mods. In our second weapon, we have Ancestral War Chief, Val Ancestral War Chief, which is very, very strong. We have Berserk and Precision. And then in our boots, we have a 4-link cast when damage taken setup. Now, you don't need this 4-linked, but I did it out of convenience. So Molten Shell is really nice to have on cast when damage taken. We have Phase Run as well on cast when damage taken, which means it's not going to be up very often, and we're not going to be able to use it to get the phasing aspect of it, but we will get the melee physical damage buff that you get for a brief duration after it casts. So you're going to take a huge chunk of damage, you're going to start attacking, and you're immediately going to get that buff for a split second. It's not very long, but it is just a little bit of extra damage when you're taking hits from enemies. Get a little damage spike is nice. And lastly, Blood Rage, we have also on cast when damage taken. We have it on we have level 1 on our weapon here, so we don't need this, but if you don't have a Blood Rage Paradoxica, you'll definitely need to have this somewhere. And it's nice just to have it on cast when damage taken, because I'm always face tanking stuff. So I do get hit enough to cast this regularly. And then lastly, our 6-link in our chest. We have level 21 Perforate. We have increased critical strikes, pulverize, big AoE, increased critical damage support, anomalous rage. Anomalous rage is really nice because it just gives us extra attack speed. Very, very strong. And awaken melee physical damage support. Now we don't run things like brutality because we want to be able to do elemental damage from our headhunter. If you want to swap in a different skill, like I tested cleave, you're going to need a different 6-link, but things like cleave are really, really strong with this rage setup. You know, you get some AoE, you hit the whole screen, it all blows up. I just realized that I skipped the chest in the gear section. Okay, guys, quick rewind to the gear section. We're talking about the gear again. This chest, I crafted and got pretty lucky. So what you do is you take Explode and the additional curse mod on 2 different chests and use an Awakener Orb to push them together into one. I was lucky enough to hit Hunter Life. You're not going to get Hunter Life, but you do not need it for this build to function. It's just really nice to have. So once you get that, you lock the prefixes and you can reforge attack and give yourself an attack crit chance mod, which is really, really strong for us. And I also got very lucky and hit physical damage reduction. So super lucky chest. Yours is not going to look this good for the most part, but this is ideally what you're looking for. Explode, additional curse, and attack crit. If you're using a pair of Ascendancy Gentle Touch gloves, you absolutely have to have the extra curse. You can probably play this build without the Explode chest, just use the gloves because your area is pretty big, but Explode makes a build like this feel so, so good. So I highly recommend getting the chest and maybe even using the gloves too. You can get some chain explosions going. But yeah, so Explode, additional curse, attack crit are the core things that you're looking for on the chest. We haven't gone over the Flasks, so let's do that quick as well. Just a bunch of crit, and then movement speed, attack speed, armor, and then armor suffix. Very, very basic stuff here because we get so much out of our armor because we use it for our unbreakable to get our elemental damage reduction up. Armor is super strong. The life bleed flask, and then bottled faith. Bottled faith gives us more regen, which is super strong when we are degenning all the time. And that is it for the flasks. So we'll jump into PoB real quick just to take a look at some of the numbers that this build is capable of. At level 98, this is a 98 tree. We have 80, 78, 78 res, max res, and then we're at 44 chaos res. We have almost 400 move speed when we're at max rage, which is very quick to get to. Some leech, some regen, some on hit, almost 30 million damage here for the blood stance version of Perforate. If we go into sand stance, you'll see that we have 8.6 million, which is more than enough for any sort of mapping scenario. And all the stuff that's checked is stuff that's full uptime while mapping. This build is not designed as is to be a bosser, like a pure walk-in and kill, I guess, like the X arc, because you need to build up your rage, and on single targets it can be annoying to do. You can do it, it's just I don't enjoy it. And as we've discussed on this channel before, what I really like doing is making builds that are good at a thing or a few things, rather than just making all-arounders, because it's way harder to get something that's really good at everything. It just requires a lot more currency. So as you'll see here, our max hit is huge. Our effective hit pool doesn't actually seem that high, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. I'm not sure what the calculation is that's causing that, but what I can tell you is while you are fighting, if you have max rage, you turn on your Berserker and you start to kill something, it is not going to kill you, whatever it is. Any arch nemesis mob. The only times I ever died while mapping were when I stopped, all of my rage ran out when I was looting, like after a delirious map, and I forgot to kill like some Legion cracked out arch nemesis mob who just ran up and one hit me when I didn't have any charges up. So pretty much while mapping, this build is immortal. It was so much fun to play. As you saw in the clips, this thing flies, it blows up the screen, and it was just a lot of fun. So what I hope will happen is that people will take this archetype that I've showcased here and make some other builds with it. I will certainly be coming back to the rage stacking archetype in the future. I'm going to try things like cleave, maybe not this league, but maybe in next league, and I may even have a league starter built around this. We'll see. I'm not sure how easy all this stuff is to get on League Start, so I'll have to look into that a bit more, but it really is cheap to put together to get the base of it going and get a mapper that just flies and is, you know, fairly tanky and just does damage without any like super expensive weapon, which is almost always the problem with melee builds. They require, you know, some 800 DPS two-handed weapon that's going to cost you 25 divines. So I hope you guys like this sort of stuff. Not just me going to the Perforate build, but me going into the archetype and possibly helping you come up with your own builds in the future. So let me know if you try this out. Let me know if you try the Perforate build. Let me know if you try the rage stacking, and let me know down in the comments below how it goes for you. So thank you for checking out my channel. Subscribe and like and comment if you want to support. Also, don't forget to check out my Twitch, twitch.tv/AER0__. And I will be going live today after this video is released. Come check me out. Thank you for hanging out. And as always, take care.